Have you ever wondered about the intricacies of the Israel-Hamas conflict? What are the factors that have led to this state of unrest and violence? These are questions that, while daunting, are vital to unravel in order to truly comprehend the complexities that surround this ongoing turmoil. The Israel-Hamas conflict, a bitter and protracted struggle, has profound implications that ripple outwards, extending beyond the borders of the countries directly involved. It influences the global political landscape, impacts international relations, and shapes perceptions and policies. In this video, we will delve into the chronological events of the conflict, aiming to provide a clearer understanding of its unfolding. The seeds of the current conflict were sown long ago, with Palestinian anger at Israeli curbs on their rights in Jerusalem. This conflict didn't emerge out of thin air. It's deeply rooted in a long-standing dispute over rights and territories, with the trigger being the Palestinian frustration at Israeli restrictions in Jerusalem. This tension was a powder keg waiting to explode, and it did, igniting a fierce battle that would go on to shake the world. In the early stages, both sides were in a state of high alert. Israel, on one hand, was gearing up its defense, readying itself for a potential onslaught. On the other hand, Hamas was threatening rocket fire throughout Israel if the truce was violated. It was a tense standoff, a game of who blinks first, and it wasn't long before the first shots were fired. As the situation escalated, the United States played a pivotal role in brokering a ceasefire. However, this truce, proposed by Egypt, did not include Israeli drawdowns in Jerusalem, as previously demanded by Hamas. This was a point of contention that would later add fuel to the fire. The ceasefire was a mere pause, a lull before the storm. In the countdown to the ceasefire, both sides traded blows, with sirens warning of incoming rockets in Israeli border communities and an airstrike in Gaza. The ceasefire was described as mutual and simultaneous by Hamas, but it was far from a resolution. In these early stages, the conflict was already taking a toll, both in terms of human lives and diplomatic relations. Health officials in Gaza reported that 232 Palestinians, including 65 children, had been killed, while Israel reported 12 deaths. The human cost was mounting, and the world was watching. Despite the ceasefire, tensions remained high. Both sides were still on edge, with Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz claiming that the Gaza offensive had yielded unprecedented military gains. The stage was set for a conflict that would only intensify in the days to come. This was just the start of an escalating series of events. As tensions rose, both sides started to retaliate, marking the beginning of an intense period of fighting. The landscape of the conflict began to shift dramatically as the stakes were raised and the situation escalated. In the heart of this escalation was a significant event that sent shockwaves through the region. A terrorist attack, orchestrated by Hamas, served as the catalyst that led Israel to declare a state of war against the group. This was not just a statement of intent, but a clear line drawn in the sand, signifying a new phase of the conflict. The Israeli response was swift and robust. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, launched an extensive bombardment of the Gaza Strip, targeting over 2,300 Hamas sites. The scale of this retaliation was unprecedented, causing significant destruction and loss of life. This marked a shift in the conflict from isolated incidents to a full-blown war. Meanwhile, on the other side of the conflict, Hamas was not standing down. The group continued their rocket fire throughout Israel, threatening to escalate the situation even further if the truce was violated. The stakes were high and the tension was palpable. But the escalation was not confined to the borders of Israel and Gaza. The repercussions of this conflict were felt far beyond the immediate region. As the fighting intensified, the international community watched on with growing concern. The conflict had reached a point where it was impossible to ignore, and the world was forced to pay attention. This increased scrutiny brought with it a new dynamic. The conflict was no longer just about Israel and Hamas, but about the wider geopolitical landscape. The involvement of powerful nations such as the United States, who pledged to provide Israel with the necessary support in its war against Hamas, added another layer of complexity to the situation. The escalation of the conflict was a critical juncture. It marked a shift from a regional issue to a global concern, with potential repercussions for international relations and global stability. The world was watching, and the pressure was on for a resolution. This marked a turning point in the conflict as it started to draw international attention. The escalation of the conflict was not just about the increase in violence, but about the broader implications for the region and the world. As we continue our journey through this conflict, we'll delve deeper into these implications and explore the international response to this crisis. With the situation escalating, Israel launched a ground invasion, targeting numerous Hamas sites. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, had mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers near Gaza, gearing up for this pivotal moment in the conflict. This was not just about retaliation, it was a strategic move aimed at dismantling Hamas's operational capabilities. The ground invasion was characterized by intense street fighting. Israeli troops, backed by tanks and armored vehicles, engaged in close-quarters combat with Hamas fighters. Despite the might of Israel's military, the urban environment posed significant challenges. The densely populated Gaza Strip, with its maze-like streets and alleyways, provided Hamas with ample opportunity for ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. Hamas, on the other hand, employed a range of defensive tactics. They used the city's infrastructure to their advantage, setting up defensive positions in residential areas, hospitals, and schools. In addition, they had a network of underground tunnels, which allowed them to move around undetected and launch surprise attacks on Israeli forces. This made the task of the IDF all the more challenging, as they had to be cautious to avoid civilian casualties while rooting out the enemy. But the ground invasion was not just about the military confrontation. It was a psychological battle as well. Hamas fighters, knowing that they were outgunned, relied heavily on their resolve and determination. They used guerrilla warfare tactics, aiming to wear down the IDF and create a sense of uncertainty among the Israeli troops. Meanwhile, there were reports of hostages being held by Hamas, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. The IDF had to balance their offensive operations with rescue missions, trying to save these innocent lives caught in the crossfire. As the ground invasion intensified, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza began to unfold. The fighting took a heavy toll on the civilian population, with countless homes destroyed and essential services disrupted. The international community watched on with growing concern, as the conflict showed no signs of abating. This was no longer just a battle between Israel and Hamas. It was a crisis that had implications for the entire region and beyond. As the conflict drew the world's attention, countries began to respond, with some offering support and others expressing concern. The international response was as varied as the nations themselves, reflecting the multifaceted layers of this complex situation. Central to this response was the role of the United States, a long-standing ally of Israel. President Joe Biden made it clear that while he did not deem it necessary to deploy US troops into Israel, he assured unwavering support in its war against Hamas. The United States' commitment to Israel's security was further underscored by the Pentagon's decision to send 2 US Navy carrier strike groups to the region. This support, however, was not without its critics. Voices were raised against the heavy-handed Israeli approach, and there were calls for restraint in the face of escalating civilian casualties. The United Nations, among others, was quick to point out the potential humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. The international community urged for the protection of civilians and for a ceasefire to be reached as soon as possible. Yet the United States' stance remained firm. The White House National Security Council spokesperson confirmed that there were no plans to send troops to fight in the conflict. However, the possibility of using troops to rescue American citizens taken hostage by Hamas was not ruled out. This commitment to supporting Israel, whilst not physically entering the battlefield, is a clear demonstration of the strategic alliances at play in this conflict. In the midst of this international response, Egypt emerged as a key player, proposing a ceasefire and working diligently towards upholding it. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ordered security delegations to work towards this goal, underlining Egypt's role in mediating peace in the region. Yet the ceasefire, described as mutual and simultaneous by Hamas, did not include Israeli drawdowns in Jerusalem, as previously demanded by Hamas. This omission hinted at the deep-seated issues that continue to fuel the conflict and challenge the international community's efforts to broker lasting peace. The international response to this conflict has been a mirror reflecting the world's diverse political landscapes. From unequivocal support to calls for restraint, from active mediation to silent observation, nations have responded in ways that reflect their own geopolitical interests and ideologies. The international response to the conflict has been varied, reflecting the complex nature of the situation. After 11 days of intense fighting, a ceasefire was proposed by Egypt and agreed upon by both sides. This truce marked the end of a conflict that had seen the loss of countless lives and the destruction of many homes and communities. The ceasefire was described as mutual and simultaneous by Hamas, a statement that carried the weight of both hope and uncertainty. It was a promise of peace, but also a stern warning against any future violations. Hamas was clear in their stance, threatening to unleash rocket fire throughout Israel if the truce was not respected. Egypt played a pivotal role in proposing this ceasefire, with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ordering security delegations to work towards upholding it. This move showcased Egypt's influence in the region and its commitment to peace and stability. The United States too played a significant part in brokering this ceasefire. In addition to being instrumental in the negotiation process, the US also pledged to provide humanitarian assistance for the reconstruction of Gaza. This commitment highlighted the US's role as a global leader, ready to step in and provide support in times of crisis. However, the ceasefire did not come without its complications. It did not include Israeli drawdowns in Jerusalem, a point previously demanded by Hamas. This omission underlined the complexity of the situation and the difficulties in reaching a comprehensive and lasting peace agreement. Despite the ceasefire, the aftermath of the conflict was palpable. The destruction caused by the fighting was widespread, and the human cost was high. Health officials in Gaza reported that 232 Palestinians, including 65 children, had been killed. Israel, on the other hand, reported 12 deaths. These numbers are a stark reminder of the devastating impact of the conflict. While the ceasefire marks a pause in the conflict, the potential for future unrest remains. The issues that sparked the conflict are far from resolved, and the threat of renewed violence looms large. As we move forward, it's crucial to remember the lessons learned from this conflict and strive to build a future where peace is more than just a temporary ceasefire. The Israel-Hamas conflict is a complex issue, with deep-seated roots and far-reaching implications. It's a narrative that's been woven through the threads of time, marked by moments of intense fighting and fragile truces. The conflict was triggered by Palestinians' anger at perceived Israeli curbs on their rights in Jerusalem. This was the spark that ignited an escalation, a back-and-forth exchange of rocket fire and airstrikes. The situation quickly spiraled, resulting in significant casualties on both sides, with children among the victims. The escalation led to a ground invasion, a move that heightened the stakes and intensified the conflict. Israel's military might was on full display as they targeted Hamas sites. However, the urban environment and Hamas's defensive tactics presented unique challenges. On the global stage, the international response was varied. The United States in particular played a significant role, providing military aid to Israel and brokering a ceasefire. This ceasefire, described as mutual and simultaneous, marked a pause in the violence, albeit a tenuous one. However, the ceasefire did not come without its own set of challenges. It did not include Israeli drawdowns in Jerusalem, an aspect previously demanded by Hamas. This, coupled with threats of more rocket fire if the truce was violated, kept the situation on a knife's edge. Understanding the complexities of this conflict is crucial in fostering global peace and stability. We hope this video has provided some clarity on the matter.